Okay, students, so now that you've finished the first part of the facility audit report, I want to introduce you to the second part. And this is going to involve reviewing some policies. So you have three documents here. You have the Part 2 project planning documents, Part 2 example policies, and then the components of the comprehensive long-range facility planning. This is the one you'll actually download and submit because you're going to add to it. This is in um, Word format, docx format, but let's look at what that actually looks like. If I can get the right one. So here it is. Let's make this a little bit smaller. There we go. So one of the things that I do outside of working for the university is I go around and we audit schools and their curriculum. We do curriculum audits, and these audits look at all aspects of curriculum. And many times we deal with facilities because facilities directly involves curriculum. And this is one of the forms that we use when we deal with facilities. And so what I want you to do is to audit or use this form to look at the long-range planning for facilities in your district. So you're going to have to hunt down some documents for this. And you can see here we have 8 standards that we use in looking at this. And I'm going to take a little bit of time here. I'm going to go through these standards. I'm going to explain what makes it adequate or inadequate, and then look at some examples of some districts in which I have been, visited, and audited, and see how we rated their long-range planning documents. So the first thing you're going to have to do is go to your district and see if they have long-range planning documents. And as we'll see, sometimes this is all in one document. Many times you'll also look for board policies and see what your board says, because you'll hear this if you're in class with me. You hear me say it's got to be in policy, it's got to be in policy. And so we'll see an example of where districts have used board policies as well. So what you're going to do in this assignment is, and let me pull this over here. So here is the Word document. You will rate each of these 8 criteria as either adequate or inadequate in your district. You'll total them up, and let me tell you, the majority of districts have very few of these criteria that are adequate. Most of them are inadequate. And then you'll simply do a percentage out of 8, how many of them are adequate, and come down. You have to have at least 6 out of 8 or 80% for the planning documents to be considered adequate. Very few districts ever get that. And then under this, as you'll see, I want you to explain your rationale for each of the 8 criteria. I'm going to give you some examples of that. So the first thing we need to do then is look at what the criteria are. So criteria number 1 says that they're within the planning documents. There's philosophical statements that reflect the community aspirations and the educational mission of the district and their relationship to the short and long-range facilities goals. Number 2 says the enrollment projections that take into account any known circumstances that may change the pupil population. And the reason this is in the second half of the semester is because your readings during this half deal with how to do enrollment projections. Number 3 says the current organizational patterns of the district and identification of possible organizational changes necessary to support the educational program. And what we mean by that, we'll see some examples, but basically, how is the district organized? A prime example of this being changed in looking at facility planning is maybe you have it set up so that you have a middle school with the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade and a high school with the 9th through 12th. And because of enrollment projections, you plan on breaking off the 6th and 7th and putting them in one building or keeping them in the middle school building and having a 9th grade center. That would be organizational patterns that are changing. Okay. Identification of educational programs considered by designers of capital projects for renovations or addition of school facilities. Criteria number 4. This is pointing to the fact that when you're building facilities projects, are you looking at specific programs and how they can affect design? For example, are you using small group design in your elementary programs? And does this small group affect how you're going to build elementary classrooms? That kind of thing, okay? Number 5, a detailed evaluation of each facility or each site within your building or your district, including the assessment of structural integrity, mechanical integrity and efficiency, energy efficiency, operations and maintenance, and health and safety requirements. This, you got some from the first part of this project. Number 6, a prioritization of needs for renovation of the existing facilities and provision of additional facilities. Number 7, a cost analysis of potential capital projects to meet the educational needs of the district, including the identification of revenues associated with capital construction. And in Oklahoma, when we talk about revenues for construction, while we do have 4 mills going into our building fund, in most districts, practically all districts, that isn't adequate to supply construction revenues, and so we're talking about bond issues here. And then finally, number 8, procedures for the involvement of all stakeholders of the school community in the development and evaluation of long-range facilities plans. So what do we mean then by each of these? The rest of this document shows you some examples of districts where I worked and how we did their facilities. So there's a lot of information here, but what I want you to concentrate on is just the part that talks about the documents used and how they rated the criteria. So here is an example from, oops, raise that up a little bit. This is the Kenosha Unified School District. This is in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is about 30 miles south of Milwaukee. They have about 20,000 students in the district, so it's a fairly large district, and you can read through this, but I just want to point out a few things. Here they listed policies used, so these are all board policies relating to facilities. And then here they're talking about a long-range document, and Kenosha didn't have one. And so what they did provide us with in this audit was a draft of the document. So we were able to see a draft of the actual document they were creating. And then you can see the report. And they rated 3 of them as adequate, 5 as inadequate. And you see the one partial here. So they rated this as partial, and we'll see in a second how they explain that. If it's rated as a partial, we usually put partial in the adequate column, letting them know they're on the way to being adequate. But when we figure this percentage, this counts as inadequate. So this is actually 3 out of 5, or 3 out of 8. You know, that's how we get 37.5%. And so this is what you're going to have to provide. So you can see here then that, oops, let me get this out of here. For each criteria, they stated why they rated it the way they did. So criteria number 1 deals with the philosophical statement. You can see here this criterion was rated adequate. Criterion is the singular form. Criteria is the plural form, by the way. And then they explain the introduction portion of the Facility Service Department Works Rules and Procedures states the environment in which the students are is very important in helping to achieve the highest possible levels, blah, blah, blah. And there's the rest of the philosophical statement. So they gave them credit for a philosophical statement. Enrollment projections. They said the district staff maintains detailed records of enrollment trends as noted in the annual budget document, but board policy requires that the Department of Educational Accountability forecast enrollments for facilities planning and share with the school board annually. Oh, it was rated adequate. I'm sorry. So this one is also rated adequate. And you can see the reason for that is because they have that. State required that. Here's the one we said was partially adequate, dealing with the program support. This is the organizational change piece. Planning documents reviewed did not include a review of the organizational patterns or contingency planning. So they didn't have that organizational pattern there. But as you can go on and see, they did talk about changes, and that's why they gave it partial credit. You can see they did this for all 8 of the criteria. Okay, now I'm not going to go through all these, but I just wanted you to see this so that when you start working on this, you can look at some examples. So that was Kenosha. And there are some more examples. You don't have to do all that. All I want you to do is on, let me get to the next one here. All I want you to do is on the actual list, I want you to rate each criteria. So I want you to give me a list of policies used, and then rate each individual criterion and explain why you rated it. Okay, and this is the document you're going to submit for this piece. So just to show you a few more examples here, this is Arlington ISD, or Arlington Independent School District in Arlington, Texas. I believe that Arlington had, well, I don't remember how many students, maybe they'll tell us. I did not participate in this audit. But here's their report. They got 2 out of 6 is rated adequate, and then you can go down and see they explained how or why they rated the items the way they did. And then this, they go into much more detail here, but you don't, again, have to go into all that detail. All I want is a list of the policies you use and your rationale for each individual criterion. So we can go down to next one. That's still Arlington. Okay, this is in Asbury Park. Asbury Park is in New Jersey. And again, here's a list of the policies they used. So they had board policies that they reviewed. They did have a long-range document they also used. And then this is just a little bit different, but you can see these are the 8 criteria. And then they explained their rationale of whether they thought the school met or did not meet the criteria. I think I have 1 or 2 more here examples. This example here, starting with facilities, this is from Tucson Unified School District in Tucson, Arizona, and this is one in which I participated. This is the last one. So you can see here, this district actually received 100% rating. This is pretty rare. And then they explained in each of the criteria that all the items they were looking for were present. And it goes on down. I think this is the last one. Yeah. And so those are just some examples of how to use that initial sheet, the 8 criteria. And once again, what you're going to do is give me a list of the policy you used to determine whether these 8 criteria were met. And then under each individual criterion, I want you to explain to me whether you rate it as adequate or inadequate and explain why. Now, many times, especially in small districts, you're going to find that your district does not have a long-range planning uh, document. They just don't do it. And so in that case, if you see here, what I have is example policies. I want you to use this right here. This is where it says board policy at the top. This is the example policies. I want you to use this as your policy. If your district does not have any policies, then I want you to use this one. Okay? And the first pages, the first 4 pages are board policies dealing with budgets in this imaginary district, and you have a 5-year plan. Okay, so I want you to evaluate this plan based on those 8 criteria. So that's only if your district does not have the long-range planning documents. The final part then is you're going to take all of this and put it into a PowerPoint presentation where you briefly explain your building, the teacher's perceptions in your building based on those questionnaires, and the students' perception based on their questionnaires, and then you're going to look at long-range planning for your district using the audit criteria, those 8 criteria that we listed, and put all that together in a PowerPoint presentation. And the final piece to that will be a reflection. And this is the rubric that will be used in looking at the reflection. Okay, the candidate includes a substantive reflection that refers to the facilities audit report and the long-range planning analysis and connects the knowledge gained to the elements being measured. The elements being measured are, number 1, an understanding of school management and operational systems, and number 2, an understanding of the efficient use of human, physical, and technological resources. So that sounds like a lot, but it's really not a lot. It's just your reflection looking back on the whole process of what you learned and where your district, your building, in a broader sense, where your district is in this plan. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what part 2 is and how you can put all this together for the presentation in part 3.